It started on a single USB drive. Now it's infected millions of computers, most of them in Iran. Experts say the Stuxnet virus is so sophisticated it must be state-sponsored. Is the world witnessing a new frontier in cyber warfare? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. Stuxnet has been described as a new class of computer virus, the most refined piece of malware ever discovered and the world's first super cyber weapon. It's now the focus of a computer virus conference in Canada and a cyber security drill in the US. Well, since its detection in June of this year, much research has been done, and as we've discovered more about it, its capabilities and its possible purposes have caused much concern. Now, this is the first publicly known worm that's capable of taking control of industrial systems. For example, it could disable the safety systems at a nuclear power plant, or contaminate fresh water supplies at a treatment facility, or take over control of oil or gas pipelines. Now, the virus has already been found on many computers across the world, in India, Indonesia, and in Iran most notably. So who's behind this piece of malware? Well, that is still a mystery. Many experts believe that it is way too sophisticated for the average geek and must be the work of a government with specific motives, possibly cyber warfare or even espionage. Joining me today to speak about the issue are, in Moscow, Rick Ferguson. He's a senior security advisor for Trend Micro. In Washington, D.C., Mark Rotenberg is executive director of the Electronic Privacy Information Center. And in Tehran, Reza Mohammadi is a computer expert. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today. Rick, if I may begin with you. Since this became public knowledge, I know that the cyber world has known about this virus for a number of months now, but since it's become public knowledge and more attention has been paid, how much more have we learnt about this virus and what it's supposed to do? And specifically, has Siemens, the company that seems to be at the heart of all of this, really told us what's going on here?
Well, it's certainly true to say that there's been ongoing research by a number of different security vendors and also from security research companies into the structure and capabilities of the Stuxnet malware. And we've begun to learn more about the kinds of exploits that it was using in order to infect machines and how it propagates. We've learned that infected machines don't simply rely on speaking to a command and control server to get instructions, but that they can also speak to each other in a kind of peer-to-peer network. So slowly but surely we're finding out more and more about the form and functions of the malware. As regards Siemens, they were very on the ball in terms of getting advice out to their customers. A number of months ago when this first surfaced, they were recommending tools to clean up the malware. They were issuing patches to fix the vulnerability in question that had allowed it to spread. So certainly as soon as they knew about it, they were very much on the ball and on top of the game.
All right, well, let's go to Washington, D.C. Mark Rotenberg, give us your impression of what is the broader significance of the discovery of this virus. Is it just another virus, just another problem that needs to be solved by people like Trend Micro and the other malware detection companies, or is there something more going on here?
Well, I think there's something clearly more going on here. Typically, when people think about computer viruses and worms and other forms of malware, they basically imagine that some of their data has been lost or corrupted, or perhaps there's remote access to their computing system. But in most people's minds, it's typically about a digital problem. I think what has people so concerned about Stuxnet is that we're beginning to see a bridging from the digital world to the physical world, because what this program does appears to be to take control of machine processes in nuclear reactors. And once you begin to imagine a world in which all the devices that are connected digitally that operate in the physical world can be used for, a whole range of very dangerous purposes, we have a very different type of problem.
Well, we'll examine the implications of all of that in just a minute. First, though, let's go to Tehran and Reza Mohammadi for a word on how are the Iranian authorities and the Iranian public viewing this? Because we've heard various comments, firstly from Iran, that it's not really much of an issue. But then yesterday we heard that they're now delaying the start of Bushehr's operations for a number of months. What exactly is the Iranian opinion on this?
So first of all, let me explain how this virus works and the biggest difference between this virus and traditional viruses. This virus, I mean, the difference is the target audience. The target of this virus is industrial computers, which they apply very high security measures. And the way then this virus could authenticate on one of the industrial computers, mostly Siemens computers, are accessing to a digital signatures of a Chinese-made chips. Like two of the biggest companies in China, they make like massive amount of microchips. And those microchips are used in those devices, like in PLC devices, like they are in the Siemens. And they have access to digital signature, and because of that, they can penetrate into industrial computers. In Iran, mostly it's just like, it's a big news. Everybody is concerned about it, and government, like always, denies it. But I'm not saying that there is a malfunction inside nuclear power plants, but we still don't know that what's going on in there. There is no solid evidence. But if anything, I think government is right to not let us know what's going on, and the delay is because they want to see if virus is affected. Has its effect on the system or not.
Well, yes, the Iranian situation has been interesting because it's actually managed to highlight the argument about how prevalent this kind of cyber attack might already be, because this isn't the first time where governments have found themselves under attack via computer. Let's look at another couple of examples. In 2007, hackers managed to infiltrate the US government's computers and download confidential data, including financial records and military secrets. And in the same year, Israel was suspected to have hacked Syria's air defenses to help them bomb a specific target in that country. And during the 2008 South Ossetia war, a series of cyber attacks disabled many South Ossetian, Russian and Georgian websites. So just a few examples of things that may well bear the same kind of signature and raise the same kind of worrying questions that you brought up on this issue, Mark Rotenberg. The questions that you raised, i.e. what exactly this might mean in terms of cyber warfare, are very troubling, aren't they? Because in the old days, taking the fight outside your own borders, actually being able to project power, relied upon money and military might. All of a sudden, you've got the possibility that individual nations with just a bit of intellectual expertise can begin to wage war, haven't you?
Well, it's a serious problem, and there's a new problem as well, and that's related. It's the problem of attribution. In other words, in the old days, at least if there was a foreign threat, it was reasonably easy to determine the source of the threat. With cyber warfare, there's a very real difficulty in determining the source of the threat, and not only is there difficulty determining the source, there's a risk that actions can be provoked by a third party knowing of this difficulty, so that what the country that believes it's under attack from another party may actually be misled as to the true source of the program. So I think people have become very concerned, not only about this new threat, but also what the appropriate response is.
Let's just try and clear up a couple of the terms we're using here. And Rick, let me come to you. I mean, Mark was talking about cyber warfare there. I know there are a number of analysts who say this isn't actually warfare, this is something a little less, and that perhaps the involvement of governments is still up in the air as far as we really haven't been able to determine who's done it. In your mind, is this really as dark as some people are painting it, or could there be a much simpler explanation?
I think it's important to contrast the capabilities of the malware and the actions that the malware has actually taken. So it's certainly true to say that the malware does have the capability to reprogram the actions of certain automation and control systems within things like power plants and water plants, as you said, and also manufacturing industrial kinds of plants. The capability exists, but up until now we have no evidence that that capability has been used. That's not to say it hasn't, but we have no direct evidence that it has been used in any disruptive war-making kind of way. So, I mean, I would argue, and I think I've pretty much stayed constant on this point up till now, I think what we're seeing is not cyber warfare, we're seeing cyber espionage. As you noted, this is not the first time we've seen cyber espionage. It goes back, the first example I can remember, to be honest, is Titan Rain, which was back in 2002, 2003, where governments such as the US and UK were accusing China of infiltrating their military and governmental networks and downloading actually terabytes of information. And we've seen further examples. Stuxnet in 2008 was aimed at media outlets and embassies and other high-value targets. And the Aurora attacks of last year aimed against Google and other companies, which is really more industrial espionage, but still it's espionage. And I think it's true to say that over time, espionage has always used the most current and up-to-date tools and techniques when it comes to communications or cryptography or any other field that's important in espionage. In fact, espionage has driven innovation in many of those areas. And I think this is just a further example that espionage is still alive and kicking, and they're using the most current tools and techniques available.
Reza Mohammadi, in Iran, the Iranian government has always been very, very aware and conscious and sensitive to espionage from outside forces, and they've consistently accused the outside world of trying to disrupt their systems. So I guess the question you have to ask at this point is, how come they were unable to find Stuxnet, and how prepared do you think Iran is for the possibility that perhaps Israel, the US, whoever, may actually be targeting Iran through this system?
Yeah, I mean, all of the Iranian governmental facilities, like 3 years ago, they banned using servers outside Iran for their websites. They need to, all of the servers, all the emails need to be inside Iran. If you want to go to a government facility, you need to give up your USB and your hard drive and anything that can contain data. But I don't think that can prevent any potential attack. First of all, about this cyber warfare, I don't think it started now. I mean, internet was invented by the US Army like 60 years ago, and they know how to use it in order to achieve data. And even cyber espionage is not something new. Like the penetration in Facebook and everything like that, like with the government is concerned, it can be easily done. But in Iran, like 2 or 3 years ago, when Facebook became something critical in terms of political advantage and in terms of communication between people who don't have the tribune to talk, it became a threat to Iran. It became a threat to current politics in Iran. So now they're concerned about that. But this is just a surface level. It's a web level, which it's not about espionage. It's just about simple two students transferring some papers. I don't think Iranians are prepared for actual warfare.
But is Iran prepared for, does Iran have the capacity, if you like? Because what we're seeing here, a lot of people are saying, is an incredibly sophisticated level of software engineering that has created this worm. To what extent is the Iranian software community and the government's defense capabilities in this regard up to speed or up to the potential ability of blocking activity like this? Like
Iranians are, we can find very, very talented Iranians, but we cannot find like big companies, big corporations to put all of them together, to work together and make something big. A virus is a piece of software. It doesn't need huge funding. It doesn't need like so much money. And like 2 or 3 good engineers, like talented engineers, can sit together and make a good virus. I think about like 2 or 3 years ago, one of the parts, the branch of IRGC, officially founded a section dedicated to cyber warfare, and they just research and they about blocking, first of all, blocking and sabotaging unwanted websites or unwanted attacks. But we're still like years behind because it needs big organization, huge funding, and gathering thousands of talented people all together. What can America can do, Israel can do, and has been doing, and Iran and China, I don't think they are ready for that.
Mark, as far as you're concerned, is the potential use of this, I mean, you know, you and Rick sort of not quite on the same page, as it were, as to whether this constitutes warfare or anything else, but...
Well, to be clear, I didn't say that it constituted warfare. I was trying to explain the significance of this virus and the risk that it presents, but I did not describe it as warfare.
Well, the question still remains. I mean, it is potentially a tool for warfare, and that was where I was going with this, is do you think that we are in a situation now where this has actually become the next frontier for governments to combat each other? Because it wasn't so long ago, was it, that the US actually began to accuse the Chinese government of spying on their military computers?
Well, yes, I mean, I think this point is correct, but I also think we're somewhere beyond espionage, because you see, this is not just a form of intelligence gathering. If this were surveillance, let's say, we would say, well, that's an activity that governments have, done for many years and will continue to do. And as Rick said, in fact, a lot of the new technologies in cryptography and decryption have evolved around the act of surveillance. But we're talking about executable code. We're talking about computer programs that take control of processes. And I think that is a new chapter, and we need to assess it. It has both defensive and offensive implications for national governments, and it clearly poses new risks.
Let's, Rick, consider the potential for some of this. And I've mentioned this to you once before. The potential might even include these ridiculous James Bond type scenarios of some major media mogul, some major industrial mogul funding the kind of virus that would allow him to take over a lot of industrial or media outlets and give him immense control of what you and I are watching every day. Is that kind of scenario potentially possible? Are we going in that direction?
It's the Lex Luthor scenario, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah. I guess if you take it to its absolute logical extreme, then that scenario, you can't discount it from possibility. On a personal level, I would discount it from probability. But I think it is important to note that...
Sorry to interrupt, but I mean, it's an intriguing scenario. You have people out there who are spending many hundreds of hours designing software for petty little tasks. You can imagine that there's someone out there with enough criminal intent who will spend money on designing a serious virus that will allow them to really take over something important.
Yeah, I think there's two things to consider. So when you consider the criminal side of online activity, it's all driven by profit and by money. And to be honest, there is so much low-hanging fruit and so much lack of awareness in the general internet user community that criminals are not driven to innovate and look for fresh victims. They make literally tens of millions of pounds per criminal group or gang per year without fail. And just look at the arrests in the UK this morning. Those 19 people that were arrested were charged with making, again, tens of millions of pounds over the course of a 12-month campaign. So criminals are not going to be driven to do this kind of extremely obvious activity, because when you're obvious, you get shut down. Criminals are much more interested in staying under the radar and just making as much money as possible. And when it comes to activity more on the Stuxnet line, you need to consider that certainly this malware was almost certainly created by teams of people with various areas of expertise. So, for example, it would require a large amount of knowledge about the kinds of systems, the SCADA systems that were targeted, and it would almost certainly require access to those systems in order to create the application for making those modifications. Also, the malware used 4 different vulnerabilities, 3 of which were zero-day vulnerabilities, previously unknown vulnerabilities, so there would have been some specialist research there. And another thing to consider is the vector by which it was initially spread, which was by USB sticks being taken around. So again, the people involved in this must have had expert knowledge that that was the kind of activity that is routine in these kinds of utility areas. So this was a very specialized, very directed activity. And then to kind of translate that to a global scale, I don't see it happening, to be honest.
Mark, do you agree? Is this going to remain determined by the boundaries that we already understand, or is there a potential for much more imaginative use of things like this?
Well, Rick makes an interesting point. I mean, this was in some respects a highly targeted project. But, I also remember the Robert Morris worm more than 20 years ago. And one of the things that I think we learned from the Robert Morris worm is that even these highly targeted projects can have unintended spillover effects. We really don't know what happens, and even the best, designers of viruses can't always control the outcomes, which means that there are real risks here. There are risks that even, targeted projects can have other impacts that can't be anticipated.
Yeah, I think we saw that, to be honest, with the spread of targets. So, 50% of the targets were in Iran, but then if we consider that 50% weren't, and I think that's quite a high level of collateral damage if we call this an attack that was targeted at one particular nation.
Yeah.
And also consider the criminal implications. So not only was there this initial targeted attack, but then consequences of that wouldn't have happened otherwise. The vulnerability that was used to spread this particular targeted attack was then immediately taken up by the criminal community to spread more traditional forms of criminal malware. And just today, starting from today, we've begun to see websites being created so that if you're searching on a popular search engine for the term Stuxnet or Stuxnet removal or anything related to Stuxnet, you're more than likely to come across malicious websites that have been designed to infect your computer. So as well as the initial attack, there's all kinds of fallout happening around it.
Reza Mohammadi, obviously Iran has been one of the prime focuses of this entire thing. So what we've seen so far is Bushehr, as I say, only yesterday being suggested that its start is going to be delayed by another 3 or 4 months. We had, according to a WikiLeaks leak a few months ago, there was a major incident at Natanz that went very much underreported, and we saw the subsequent firing or resignation of the head of Iran's atomic energy agency. Or some strange things happening in the Iranian sphere with regards to this, which is why people are taking such an interest. Do you think that this is targeted at Iran? And if so, do you think that the virus has already done its work, or is that there's more to come?
That was a very good question. First of all, we start about the target, which is Iran, part of India and Pakistan. And if they can be targeted, like US or Israel can be targeted or not with this particular virus. They use a Siemens computer, and a lot of Siemens industrial computers are affected, and the software that Siemens use in order to control PLC devices are infected. And Iran is a customer, a good customer, a huge customer of Siemens industrial machines, and also a little bit India and Pakistan. So if we look at the spread map of this virus, it's equivalent to how Siemens is inside Iranian government and Iranian industry. And because of that, Iran is a target. We see as Iran is a target. But the good question is this virus, has this virus done its job or not? If it was a government and if we wanted to get the job done, like sabotage Iranian thing, it would have been something passive. It would have been a passive attack, not an active attack, making too much media coverage. It can be a diversion, like if you're talking about conspiracy theory, it can be a diversion and the actual attack is happening right now. But what I'm saying is media are giving this too much credit. And because of that, that might give some people ideas to start working this kind of virus in order to throw a kind of a science fiction warfare in the real world. But I don't know. I want to believe that it has nothing to do with it, but I don't have the information to confirm
All right.
it.
That's
possible. That's potentially possible.
Let's consider, Mark, finally, a quick final question. I mean, Rick brought up the possibility that, if you go surfing on the net and look up Stuxnet, you may end up infecting yourself. But this was supposed to be a virus that's targeting industrial machinery. I don't use industrial machinery. Would it be harmful to the average surfer if they got Stuxnet on their computer?
Well, it depends entirely on what type of new program is developed. I mean, we understand that Stuxnet targets a certain type of Siemens hardware, so as the program is currently configured, no. But I think Rick's point, which is an important one, is that this has also created the opportunity for some new types of attack, which is what I suggested earlier. There is a problem in this arena that things are not easy to control. And I think even for people who are thinking they can design systems that can be controlled, it's just doesn't work that way.
All right. Chilling words and a chilling thought. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all very much indeed for joining us today. We'll have to leave it there. Rick Ferguson in Moscow, Mark Rotenberg in DC, and Reza Mohammadi in Tehran. Thank you all. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. We always welcome comments and suggestions. Our email address, insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.